All right. Well, with that being said, Bryce, if you wouldn't mind muting everyone, and I will turn it over to you to introduce today's program.
Well, I will. I'll hit everybody up as I go through. Pretty much everybody's muted already, but we have Debby Garman with us today from the Tualatin Valley Beekeepers. Welcome, Debbie.
I think I should unmute myself. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I am currently, I've been a beekeeper, honey beekeeper for 10 years. I'm currently the president of the Tualatin Valley Beekeepers Association, which is a group of about 200 people, pretty much amateurs, and our mission is to support beekeepers so they can support bees. And along the way, I've learned a little bit about our native pollinators as well. I've been interested in beekeeping for a long time and decided I couldn't afford it because the basic equipment of the boxes and the protective gear is around about $500, say, unless you work really hard at finding used equipment and whatnot. And then Mother Nature tripped me up. She sent in 2010 on the summer solstice, June 21st, she sent a swarm of bees to my backyard. So it's like, well, okay, must be time then. So it's been a learning curve ever since then, and beekeepers are a fun bunch. They're opinionated, and the bees are contrary or not. The bees do what the bees do, and it's really fascinating, the complexities of their lives that beekeepers try to impact and may or may not be able to get the critters to do what they want them to do. So, but it's always fascinating. And a friend of mine, I'm used to talking bees and beekeeping out in public, public tabling and outreach events. I've worked with the Forest Grove Community School, worked with Pacific University, and I'm more used to facilitating Zoom meetings than presenting on them. And I didn't have online tools. So I asked a friend of mine in the Beekeeping Club, Miles Seeley, if I knew he had done some presentations, and he lent me his slide deck. And with luck, if we can do a screen share. Oh, I also wanted to say, I don't know what your norms are about questions, but I really do want to tailor this to your group's interests. I think I'm talking about honey beekeeping, but there's tons of information about other pollinators. I'll touch on some of it. So please do let me know by asking your questions. Put me through my paces, make sure that you get the information that you're interested in having. So I don't know if you people, I'm going to look at the chat group. Okay, so there's nothing there for me. So just raise your hands or do whatever it is that you all do to have an engaged experience. I'm not used to being a flat person and doing this presentation stuff online. So if we could, can I see if I can share my screen successfully, Bryce?
You should be able to, clicking on the share screen button at the bottom of the Zoom window. There we go.
All right, now let's see. Let's see if I can figure out. Look, are you seeing a full screen of information there?
Looks great, Debbie.
Thank you so much. Yay, first major hurdle overcome, woohoo. So this is my friend Miles's deck of slides. He's got some wonderful pictures of bees, which is the beauty of the bees and their pollinating practices in the flowers is one of the reasons that people enjoy beekeeping. So what I've learned becoming a honeybee keeper is they're very unique critters. They live in a social group, a mega organism. Unlike nearly all the other bee species are what they call solitary bees. and or there's a few that live in smaller colonies like bumblebees, and all of them are attuned to the process of the cycle of seasons in our universe. So they've for centuries have figured out how to connect with the resources that they need and protect themselves. They either die off or and leave babies over the winter, but honeybees have this special big colony life. So we've got honeybees, native bees, and a little bit, there's a bunch about beekeeping. So I hope you're generally interested in what it is to keep bees, honeybees, in this slide deck. So there's several questions in our relations with bees. What do we consider is the most important activity of honeybees? If any of you have thoughts on that, that would be, I'd be interested to hear. And what is it that honeybees use to make honey? Because that's one of our favorite things as people about what honeybees do. And there's a lot of discussion in the news these days about whether honeybees are on the verge of extinction. So we'll ramble through some of these topics here. And I can't, in this view as a presenter, I can't see the chat box, so be sure and interrupt me in some fashion if you have answers or have questions. So next, one of the other topics in beekeeping world is the fact that nearly everybody thinks that a buzzing insect in your universe is a bee. And in fact, that critter that's going after your picnic hot dog or your salmon is not at all a bee. It's a wasp. It's a western yellow jacket, most likely. And bees get a bad rap. Bees, native bees, all kinds of buzzing things get a bad rap because of how unpleasant yellow jackets are. So a great thing to do is help your fellow citizens when they're ticked off at these buzzing yellow predators going after your plate, is to let them know, no, that's not a bee, that's a wasp. And in fact, it's a yellow jacket. And the yellow jacket has a job in the world, which is cleaning up. And so that's really important, but beekeepers hate them nevertheless, because some of what yellow jackets clean up when their colonies get big in the fall, in August and September, is they clean up our honeybee colonies. They'll come in and knock out a honeybee colony, and in a couple of days. It's quite devastating, and there's very little that you can do to prevent that. But the yellow jackets are taking all the bee resources, especially the babies, back to feed their babies. And that's the way the circle of life goes around there. So honeybees are non-natives. Many of them got brought over on ships from Europe. Those were the original honeybees in this country. I'm told that the Native American population here were really puzzled at the whole thing and called honeybees the white people's fly, because they couldn't figure out what those things were, because they didn't have colonies of honeybees until that point in time. Other honeybees have been imported from Asia, and I think most everybody has heard tales about the Africanized bees that escaped out of a laboratory in Brazil and are making their way northwards towards us. So the most fascinating thing I think I've learned in my career as a beekeeper is about the native bee species. It's only recently that because of worldwide insect collapses due to pesticides and lack of thoughtful human stewardship, scientists in Oregon, OSU folks, decided that it might be good to take a data point on exactly what the native bee species are in Oregon, and they did a concerted effort with citizen volunteers to go out and identify. And in the past 2 years, it's an astounding number has been identified of more than 800 native bee species in the state of Oregon. And most of those are what they call solitary bees that don't live in colonies like honeybees do. But they're all, I mean, they're teeny tiny ones, they're huge ones, many bumblebees. It's just a fascinating universe. So back to honeybees. this is what your worker honeybee looks like. 6 legs, big eyes, fuzzy, unless it's a really old honeybee worker that's just has worn all its fuzzy hair off. And an interesting thing is that big yellow pad on the back leg, which is the pollen pouch. That girl has been successful and has packed a whole pile of pollen particles onto a specific hook on her back leg, and it's going to be able to safely carry it back to the hive. So bees all use nectar and pollen for their food, and as they go around in the world collecting their food, they pollinate the plants. The nectar, the juice from the flowers, is the carbs for their diets, and then the pollen is basically the protein, the building blocks to feed their babies. And honeybees are basically the only bees that, because of their unique colony, mega-organism lifestyle, they store food so that they can survive over the winter, and they move through their pantries through the winter period. If there's enough of them, and if it's warm enough to move cell to cell to cell to eat their food, then they're going to survive the winter. If that's not at play, many hives, many colonies don't survive. That's that. So in a honeybee colony, there's one queen that rules them all. She's the longest lived of them. And if she's young and in her prime, she can lay over 1,000 eggs a day. And her laying schedule is totally connected to available food sources out in the world. In the middle of winter, she probably doesn't lay at all. And as the winter solstice comes along, she begins to lay. Yep. But the majority of bees in a colony are the workers, female workers. There's many thousands of them in the hive, and the queen has, if she does her work properly, she lays lots and lots and lots of workers to be available to maximize bringing food back to the colony so that everybody gets to survive over the winter. And then the male bees are the drones. They are seasonal, only when the colony has plenty of resources and it's time for swarming and new queens, and their primary purpose is to fertilize the virgin queens as they fly. They get kicked out of the hive when fall comes along because all they do otherwise is chow down. And here's a cool picture. The left-hand bee is a worker bee. The center is the queen bee, who's much longer and slimmer. After she has her mating flight, she never leaves the hive again. She just lays eggs and lays eggs. And the bee on the right is a drone bee. He's fatter and sort of bullet-shaped, and those don't sting. If you can identify them, then you can play with them in your hands if you want to. So the worker bees go through a life cycle where when they are born, they immediately start working in the hive to clean and provide nursing services for new babies. They continue to do work inside the hive until they graduate to their final stage of foraging. So there we've got, as a beekeeper, you want to be aware of the guard bees. Their job is to come after you if they think that you are threatening their hive, which when a beekeeper goes in to do checking and certainly honey harvesting, the guard bees are they can be pretty fierce. And then the forager bees are the largest quantity there in the summertime. They're out there working in the flowers. So here's a little bit about honey. When the bees bring the honey back from the flowers, it's quite a process to pack it into the little wax cells, and the bees work really hard. It's just an amazing number of trips to bring honey back, nectar back, to pack into the cells. Then they evaporate it using their wings. And when it reaches the right amount of water, which is less than 18%, it won't spoil. And then they put a wax cap on it and it's good to go. Honey, good honey was retrieved from King Tut's tomb in Egypt. So it's got phenomenal ability to stay good over a long time. Bees in our area are frequently used for pollination. Crimson clover is a crop that they're particularly fond of. And they're really essential in the world of commercial agriculture to, you see hives out in the blueberries and other berries as the flowering takes place so that folks can be ensured of good harvests of the fruits. Some beautiful shots of bees doing their job of pollination. And then again, this is with honeybees, they pack their pollen in on these pouches on their back legs. For bumblebees and mason bees, they can be much better pollinators because they carry the pollen on bristles all over their body, which is it shakes off more readily. So they're actually better pollinators than honeybees. But honeybees' virtue is the long length of their constant life cycle. Other bees live for a short period. And also the fact that humans can manipulate bees for their own purposes, moving them around and getting them to do work for us. So we like the honey, but the pollination is the most critical thing for all of pollinators, honeybees being maybe at the top of the usefulness, because 1 in every 3 bites of our food is created by a pollinator. And not only are our food sources dependent on pollinators, but also if you think about it, the whole next generation of plants is dependent. Only a few things in nature don't need a pollinator to make a seed. So if we lose our pollinators, we're not going to have the next generation of oak trees or plum trees, apples, whatever. So although we like honey, the pollinator work that these little critters do is the most important thing for us. So 75% of plants require pollination. Grain crops, cereal crops, wheat and whatnot, and grapes don't require pollinating, but just nearly everything does. 90% of commercial crops require pollination. In China, they use devastating pesticides in their landscape for quite a while, and in many cases now they're reduced to hand pollination with a little tiny paintbrush to move pollen from blossom to blossom. So that sounds, and I guess these days because of pollinator losses, they're talking about developing teeny tiny drones to do some of that work. Who knows? I like the bees as they are. So summer and winter honeybees, that was a pretty cool thing to discover as a beekeeper on a learning curve. The summer bees just work their tails off for about 6 weeks. They get out of the hive for their final, we talked about them being in the hive for their first period of life, and then their last weeks are working so hard to go back and forth, bringing tiny, tiny bits of pollen and nectar back to the hive. And in the winter, things shift. The bees have to live, they stay in the hive during cold times. They create a ball around the queen bee and any of the active brood baby raising area, and they prickle their thoraxes to keep the temperature, no matter what the temperature is outside, the bee colony inside needs to stay at 90 degrees. So that's a real different kind of a work than flying back and forth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. So kind of crazy that the bees have the capacity to completely shift their lifestyles between the summer outside time and the winter stuck indoors time. So I have a quibble with Miles's slide deck here, because there are substantial honeybee losses going on annually, something like 40%. Internationally, populations are lost, which means that genetic material is diminishing, which means that, I mean, there at some point in time, honeybees are going to go critically unable to continue their function in the world. And native bees have it even worse. The loss of habitat and pesticides and fungicides are creating real havoc with them. So it's good to think about our activities as human beings when we're working in the same universe as the tiny things around us. So beekeeping. You see out there in the landscape the big pallets of beehives that are transferred here and there. The most profitable arena for commercial beekeepers is the almond pollination in Northern California in February. And it's one of the interesting factors on bees is that commercial beekeepers from all over the United States truck hundreds of thousands of hives to Northern California annually. That's part of the traveling lifestyle of commercial bees. And it can be a really bad thing. There's exposure. Every bee from around the country may be exposed to pesticides and viruses and diseases down there, and then they get trucked back home. So it's a great stew pot of whatever the bees are bringing. And I'm a hobby beekeeper. Most of our organization are hobby beekeepers, and we do it for fun. I got involved because I was interested in trying to help steward bees and keep them around. Here's what a beehive looks like. You see them out in the landscape if you know what to look for. In Western Oregon, usually there are two of these deep boxes, also called brood boxes. And then if in the middle of nectar flow season, which blackberries are huge here, May, June, there may be these smaller, less deep boxes put on top, and that's for the extra honey. We think we can steal the extra honey that is in the top super. And another reason that the boxes are shallow is because honey is an amazingly heavy substance. A full super up above shallow box can be about 60, 70 pounds to lift. So you gotta keep your fitness going to be a beekeeper. So this is information about the way that bees develop, eggs to larvae, and then they, depending on what the queen is laying, the workers take 8 to 21 days to hatch. The queen is the quickest, and drones take longer. So as I said earlier, the queen lays according to food resources out in the world. So this is what you see inside a bee living room. The nice tan capped area is capped brood larvae around the edges on both sides. The nurse bees are parking and utilizing bee bread made from pollen and honey to feed the babies. And there's another, it's pretty fascinating what there are hanging frames that humans have used to recreate what you find in a feral natural beehive. So I talked about honey supers already. Some in the olden days, you could put 3 or 5 or 8 supers on top of a vigorous honeybee colony and then pull them off. And then I think this is one of the most beautiful things in the world. This is a perfect frame of capped honey. When the honey is at the right moisture level, the bees will put a cap over it, and that is preserved, a wax cap. It's preserved pretty much forever then, except for when bees beekeepers steal the honey and take those frames out, take the wax covering off, and somehow, this is a electric centrifuge extractor on the left, they spin out the honey and then pour it into bottles and take it to market. So this is my friend Miles' helper grandkids, and this is my friend Miles being a very brave beekeeper. This is what they call bee bearding. It's not something that I have found the need to do in my life. And it's done because a queen bee is put in a little cage on a string that's hung around his neck. And all of the bees who are affiliated family of that queen bee are trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and they want to be near mom. So they gather, and it's also confusing that in theory nobody gets stung. Who knows? I think I'm not going to try it. So that's it. And I just yammered on, and I didn't let you have any questions, but I hope that there are some.
How do you take your bee beard off?
You have to gently reach in and remove that queen in the little screen cage that's hanging around his neck and take it somewhere else. And then the bees will follow mom and be returned to their hive.
I've got a couple of comments I'd like to make. One of them was they said they found some honey in one of the pyramids in Egypt, but it was put there for the king to eat in the afterlife. And they said that honey was still good. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it's true. I will tell you that honey of low moisture content crystallizes, so I'll bet it was pretty hard, but perfectly edible. Honey has phenomenal, resistance to bacteria and whatnot. And in past times, people have put honey on wounds to heal them. It's everything that bee products, there's a couple of other bee products, are just amazingly antiseptic and healthy, wholesome things.
The other thing is they got the killer hornets up in, I think it's in Washington, and I guess they're very, they're deadly as far as honeybees go.
We beekeepers are quaking in our boots about that. Apparently, they probably came in their part of their life cycle is underground, like many bees and wasps, and I think that the queens overwinter in dirt, and probably they came in just like the Japanese beetles in some nursery shipment up into Canada, accidentally, not people not knowing what was buried in the ground around some plant root ball. And so several have been caught and killed, and we just don't, I have my fingers crossed, and all of us do, that they're able to capture all of the queens and stop any spread of that critter, because it will be devastating to beekeeping in this part of the world, because apparently they can lay waste to, as I understand it, a scout hornet finds a beehive, marks it, and then brings back the troops, and they will lay waste to that bee colony of hundreds of thousands of bees in very short order. So fingers crossed that Washington State is doing a good job of setting out traps and stopping them from moving. They fly, I don't know, 20 miles or something like that, so they can leapfrog over time and be right here on our backyard. So yeah, I wanted to make I wanted to make a pitch for using less pesticides and fungicides and whatnot. And I'd also like to make a pitch for thinking about our particular fondness for yards of grass, because grass is like concrete for tiny pollinators. It's got nothing for them. So if you have a dandelion or you have some Dutch clover in there, think think twice before you get rid of it to preserve your pristine green expanse. Just read a review of a wonderful new book called Nature's Best Hope, which is all about, it was in the Oregonian review last week, about adding diversity of plant material to and getting rid of grass where you can, because nature is meant to be a complex universe, and a lot of critters are utilizing systems that we're not even aware of. So just a suggestion. And there's a great new catalog from Oregon State University called Urban and Suburban Landscapes to Protect Pollinators. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn about how we can support the whole network of wholesome life around us that supports us as the apex folks on top.
I have a question.
Yep.
2 years ago, I remember my cousins having a hard time with mites or something. It like destroyed 4 of their hives. Is that still a real popular thing? Is it still happening?
Oh my gosh. It's an introduced parasitic mite called Varroa destructor. It's aptly named. It's very destructive. And North American honeybees have no defenses against it. It is a sticky mite that travels around. It lives in colonies, it lives on plants, and it grabs onto bees and goes home with them. And then the mom mite lays an egg, sneaks down into the bottom of the cell where the honeybee is about to lay an egg, and mom mite lays a couple of eggs in there and then skinnies out, so that the mites hatch a little more quickly than the honeybee, and they're ready just to glom on as soon as the honeybee hatches. And the size of these things on the honeybees is like having a cat on your body. That's the proportion. And they not only suck out the hemoglobin in bees, but they also are massive germ virus vectors, so that they will weaken if not treated. And treating has to be done with a variety of different stuff. It's not fun. It's toxic to the bees, but it's more toxic to the mites. It's a real drag. I mean, I guess back in the halcyon days of beekeeping 50 years ago, you didn't have to do all this stuff, but diligent beekeepers these days are putting in a cycle of various miticides in hopes that we have to keep the count of mites low enough that it doesn't impact the overall health of the colony. So that's that. They're in the landscape, and we'll be living with them, I think, ongoing. There's a question in the chat box about low count of bees affecting farming. Okay, so yes, it is. With the impact of the varroa mites and the diseases that the varroa mites bring, it is being more challenging for commercial beekeepers to have enough bees to take. I think there's so much demand in the almonds in California that commercial beekeepers are barely able to provide enough hives these days. So it'll be something to watch in the years to come. I think that we will be having a major crisis. And as part of that question, how long do bees live? Summer worker bees only live about 6 weeks because they work so hard and their wings give out. They fray and they simply can't fly anymore. Winter bees, you have to make sure you've knocked your mites down before the winter bees come along, because those bees have to live from September, October, November, December, January, February, probably, in order to keep the colony warm and the processes moving along. So it's a crazy difference in the lifestyles and jobs of those bees and how it impacts the length of their life. And how do they produce wax? They have glands in their tummy area that exude a flake at a time, and they build universes with these tiny flakes. You go online and look at some pictures. bees making wax. So I'm a fan. I hope I haven't bored you to tears here.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Debbie. I think we take for granted some of the little species that help us live the lives that we have.
Yeah, yeah. And if anybody is interested in, if you think you might like to have in your retirement or whenever, enjoy the relaxing work of hosting a beehive, the Tualatin Valley Beekeepers Association loves to provide information and support people in stewarding their honeybees.